Wine Industry Network's 2024 Bold Prediction Series is presented by Heffernan Insurance Brokers, with supporting sponsors Protea Financial, Turntine Brokerage, and American Ag Credit. Thank you for your support.
Hi, Liz Bishop
and Deborah Costa
here from Heffernan Insurance Brokers, and we are your fire mitigation and insurance
gurus.
This wildfire structure protection unit is a unit that the British Columbia government has been utilizing for about 10 years. And in 2023, there were 500 structures that were saved by this unit. So it has proof of concept.
Here today, we have Adam Iveson from Ember Defense to share with you a few important notes about this structure.
So this is a structure protection unit. This has everything on board to be self-sufficient. This has pumps, sprinklers, hose lays, bladders, everything to be off the grid to protect your property ahead of an oncoming wildfire.
Liz and I, in partnership with Ember Defense, are committed to protecting your winery property. Just think, if everyone invested in a wildfire protection unit, together we could ensure that wineries don't burn and make insurance affordable again. Text WASP Demo to 707-789-3062 for a free demo on your property.
Hey everyone, George Christie here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to part 2 of our Bold Predictions webinar titled Wine Advocates Push Back on the Anti-Alcohol Movement. And this is actually the first time we've ever done a part 2, but we had to do it because when we were promoting the original webinar, we had so many questions that were submitted. It was so popular. We had so many people register. We had so many questions that were submitted that we realized immediately there was no way we were going to be able to present all of the content that we wanted to present, as well as tackle the questions. So we decided we'll do a part 2, and part 2 is just going to be really a kind of a Q&A with our presenters. So just as a reminder, our original panel, we had Gino Colangelo, who is the president of Colangelo and Partners. He was joined by Shyla Salmon, who is the senior vice president of marketing at Jackson Family Wines. Dave Parker, who is the president and CEO of Benchmark Wine Group, as well as Benchmark Wine and Spirits. And he's also the president of the National Association of Wine Retailers. And last but certainly not least, we had Karen MacNeil, who's the author of the Wine Bible and editor of Wine Speed. So today, the way it's going to work is we're going to start with Gino, Shyla, and Dave, a little bit of a roundtable discussion. And then we're going to wrap up with a little one-on-one with Karen and really get into some of the specifics around the Come Over October initiative, which is really grabbed the gear, and we're super excited to be a part of that. Before we begin, I want to be sure to thank our sponsors. Our series presenting sponsor, Heffernan Insurance Broker, and they are joined by our series supporting sponsors, Protea Financial, Wine Accountants, Turntine Wine Brokerage, and American Ag Credit. All 4 of those companies are great partners of ours and allow us to continue to push out good content like this to our wine industry audience for free. So thank you for your support. Gino, I'm going to start with you, president of Colangelo and Partners. I think you guys started in 2006. I was doing a little bit of my research, but for our audience, talk a little bit about the work that you do at Colangelo.
So Colangelo and Partners is a wine and spirits PR agency. We're about 85% wine, which makes us we're approximately 75 people, which makes us rather large within the wine business, but still rather boutique in the general scheme of PR agencies. My partners and I decided years ago that our idea of diversification was to open an office in California to complement our European wine business rather than going into hotels or restaurants or other types of businesses. We really are committed to the wine industry. Like I said, we have 75 people. I write 75 paychecks every 2 weeks, so I feel very committed to a healthy wine business. I have a vested interest as well as a passion for the wine industry.
Thank you, Gino. And Shyla, senior vice president of marketing at Jackson Family Wines. I saw you're a graduate from Cal Poly. Our youngest daughter just graduated there a few months ago, which I'm super sad about because I don't have a good excuse to go down to San Luis Obispo as much as I've done. But you've been with Jackson Family for, I think, 13 years, and before that, Constellation for 6 or 7 years. Talk a little bit about your role at Jackson Family Wines, because I know you're very busy.
Thanks, George. We're all busy right now. So I at Jackson Family Wine started building their luxury division, the Spire collection. So I spent about 5 years doing that. Brands like La Jolla, Cardinal, and Verite, putting them on the world stage. And now I have moved, kind of evolved my role into running Kendall Jackson, La Crema, brands like Murphy Good, Cambria down in Santa Barbara, Brewer Clifton, Matanzas Creek. So I have about a third of the Jackson family portfolio that I oversee on the brand marketing side.
Which again, I know that keeps you very busy. I know that. And Dave, talk a little bit about Benchmark Wine Group and Wine and Spirits, as well as tell our audience a little about the National Association of Wine Retailers and your mission there.
Sure. Thank you, George. Benchmark Wine and Spirits is our newest company in Washington, D.C. We service the Northeast part of the country from there, but it was a spinoff from our original company, Benchmark Wine Group in Napa, founded in 2002, primarily focused on back vintage and extremely hard to get wines. We've become the largest retailer in that space in the country, and we do a significant amount of distribution. We hold a distribution license too. So about 70% of our sales are to collectors, consumers, about 30% to top restaurants, and the rest to bottle shops and Asia, brokers primarily. The National Association of Wine Retailers was founded to support retailers' ability to ship to consumers all over the country. And following in on the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution, any state that allows a retailer to ship product to consumers in their state has to allow retailers from outside the state to do similarly. And so we support that as our primary goal. We support a lot of other concerns that wine retailers may have. We worked hard to have tariffs removed a number of years ago, and we're very engaged in the current concerns regarding limitations of sales and market that may occur due to disinformation, such as we're talking about here.
Well, I appreciate you guys joining us again. I thought you did a really good job on the original broadcast. I rewatched it yesterday just to refresh my memory, and it was cool to watch it the second time because I picked up on some things that I didn't pick up on the first time through. And Dave, especially some of the data that you were presenting, which was super interesting, kind of the background of things, and a good segue. So just for our audience, again, we had so many questions. We're not going to even get to all the questions that people submitted, but what we tried to do is bring together the ones that were somewhat in common, kick out the redundancies, and cover as much as we can. So Dave, I'm going to let you sort of take the lead on this first section of questions, and encourage Shiloh and Gino to pile on wherever it is that you feel like you want to add something. So how long has the World Health Organization been recommending that no level of alcohol is safe for our health, and how has that impacted regions outside of the United States?
Yeah, they brought that out at the beginning of 2023 with that proclamation. It's hard to say how much that's affected consumption, especially of wine. Mm-hmm. One of the immediate results was that Canada tried to put in place as a modification to their nutritional guidelines that said that more than 1 to 2 drinks a week are bad for your health and are not recommended. Now, that got a lot of press. As it turns out, the Canadian government looked at the data behind that study, said that was not accurate data, nor was the data accurately analyzed. And so to date, the Canadian government still sticks with its recommendations of 2 to 3 drinks a day for a man, 1 to 2 for a woman, as being within the range of reasonable and healthy consumption. So that was the major the major concern, and what we're concerned about now is the U.S. nutritional guidelines will be coming out in 2025 for the first time. they're going to have a separate alcohol analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, they've impaneled 6 people in a rather opaque process. All 6 people appear to be lobbyists for the anti-alcohol groups.
Mm-hmm.
And the original 2 scientists that they had that were neutral scientists on that panel have been removed. And so we think the process is not only opaque, but is biased.
So we know about the World Health Organization. You referenced a couple of other anti-alcohol groups or associations. Who are they?
Okay, so the players on the anti-alcohol side, a lot of them date back a long time. 1851, this group called the International Order of Good Templars, or IOGT, got going, almost sort of a cult, but over the years, they got very involved in the initial prohibition, obviously back in the 20s. They've morphed into a group called Movendi International and now have about 42 countries. They operate from about 42 different countries. So they're a major receiver of anti-alcohol contributions and a major distributor of that money for lobbying purposes, communication purposes, and so forth. But they aren't the only ones by any means. Another group that predates prohibition, the so-called Anti-Saloon League, has morphed into the American Council on Addiction and Alcohol Problems. They're doing the same thing. They're receiving a lot of money and they're using it for anti-alcohol communication, a lot of it completely biased as well as lobbying. There's a third group called Alcohol Justice, and you can go to their website. They say their goal is to eliminate alcohol consumption in the world, first steps being to dramatically raise taxes and dramatically restrict marketing communication. So those are the 3 major ones. Mothers Against Drunk Driving got a large infusion of money and more than they've had for a very long time in this current wave. They rightfully restrict that to driving and now include driving under the influence of THC and other substances. But all 4 of them, it's about money, it's about power, it's about political influence, and it's quite biased.
Is the money primarily coming from just individuals, or is there corporate funding supporting this? Where's the money coming from?
Well, I think that's the question. A lot of that's not clear. Certainly a lot of it is coming from individuals. A lot of it may be coming from other groups. A lot of it may be coming in from outside the country. To the extent that you disrupt an economy, you as an international player may have a motive for doing that. And one of the more disturbing factors is that a lot of this money is of unknown origin.
Interesting. There was a question about whether or not our industry, the Wine Institute, some of our bigger organizations have a dialogue with the World Health Organization or any of these other anti-alcohol organizations. Is there any dialogue between our industry representatives and these groups, or no?
Well, since the WHO represents mainly the Europe and only indirectly affects us just through their messaging, they don't have jurisdiction over us, although they're trying to get that. I'm not aware of groups within the US that are in communication, but a lot of communication has started, so I wouldn't be surprised to find out if it has. What has happened is the USDA and the Health and Human Services departments, which are going to be putting out the nutritional guidelines next year, did a very short solicitation for which some large players in the alcohol industry said, your process is opaque. We take an exception with it. We think you need to come back, extend the period, and make your process more open. So that was sort of the first major response that I'm aware of to that group. And I think a lot of the focus here in this country is going to be to that group and their process going into their 2025 update on the nutritional guidelines.
During the original broadcast, you presented a lot of data. I think it was from the National Institute of Health that talked about that some of the data supported moderate consumption is actually good for your health. Why aren't we shining the light on that more?
It's become, I think, not either non-fashionable or the same people that want to control messaging and what the press is hearing, as well as even such simple things as search engine results are biased against it. So, the messages from 60 Minutes in 1991 and the follow-up that the press had on those positive aspects, which have been supported by studies for 60 years and continue to do so, are being muted purposefully, just as perhaps some other messaging that we've received over the last few years has been muted to suit the people that would like a different message out there.
Can I add that I've heard of scientists who would like to do research into the topic being dissuaded because then they're not going to get funded for other research by big research-based foundations, and that's really limiting and risky when science is so slanted based on funding.
That's interesting. I didn't realize, almost like kind of being blackballed by pushing out research or results that support that moderate consumption is healthy.
Or research that simply examines and lands where it may based on the findings.
Yeah, I'm in communication with a large medical group, Society of Medical Friends of Wine, and they are also very reluctant, even though they believe in the healthful aspects of modest consumption. They're being dissuaded from communicating that to their patients.
It's like a spy novel. Like you don't know where the money's coming from. We don't know the dark forces that are like working against us here. That's crazy. Shai, let you take this one. So switching gears a little bit, how much of our challenges are due to efforts like what we've seen with the World Health Organization or trends like Dry January, Sober October, versus just as an industry failing to better connect with the next generation of wine consumer?
I think failing is a big word, George. I don't think that we are failing to connect to a next generation of wine consumer. I think that we are. I think what's happening is that what they desire and their behaviors have shifted, and the wine industry needs to evolve with that. But if we step back to the first part of your question, I think the WHO concerns are at a macro level, right? And right now it's really reaching a lot of us in the Bev Alc industry and hasn't bled over necessarily into all the consumer spaces. The concern is that it will, and the FDA, if that changes, will compound it. And so, that's something that we're just very attentive to. But in the meantime, I think we can't take attention off the health of our business and continuing to bring people into the fold. And knowing that, and I think Karen said this in the last call, that wine is just being grouped as another alcohol. And wine is actually like a smaller portion of the alcohol category. Spirits and beer are much larger and will be affected more. For us, we're a smaller portion. And so I don't think sometimes we're hearing, I think as an industry, alcohol and wine as synonymous as the same term, but in reality, it's bigger, right? For us, what we like to focus on are the opportunity parts, which is a demographic that sees wine as part of their life. They're 80 plus household income, they're eco-conscious, they're urban and suburban. They are active and engaged in our category. And what we see right now is the millennials, which we talked about for years, is going to be the downfall of wine, are actually very, very engaged in our category. And they are participating at all kinds of levels when it comes to retail purchases, online purchases, wine tourism. That is looking good, and it's following the trends of the past. Gen Z is a little bit different. And so if we want to just talk about straight numbers, because I'm all about just the facts these days, we pulled apart IRI data by month the last 5 years for the wine category. So we started in 2018 and we went all the way through 2024 so far. What we see for dry January and sober October, that are things that we're concerned about, that there's actually not a decline in wine consumption during those periods. It looks pretty healthy. And so the trends normally are less wine in January because people just drink less. That's our normal trend cycle. And then October, November, December, the trend goes up. If we look at 2018 to 2023, there's increased spend in the wine category during both of those months versus 5 years ago, and pretty healthy increased spend. So if we look at 2019 January, the wine category was $750 million of spend, and it went up to $765 million in 2023. So that's $15 million of growth, not a decline with dry January taking over. And in October 2019, it was $789 million of wine sales. In October of 2023, it's $806 million of wine sales.
Wow.
So we don't see dips. So then we dug a little bit further and we went by generation. And this is where there's a little bit of concern, but not a lot. So I'm saying a little bit, but we'll show you guys the numbers. For all generations except for Gen Z, we see no change in dry January and October for wine purchases. In Gen Z, in October, we see the slightest decline from 2019 to 2023, but they recover those purchases in November and December. What that says is they may be influenced by the concept of this, but they're not completely pulling out of the wine category. They're coming right back. And when you look at that at Gen Z over time, they're actually spending more per trip in those months than they were a couple of years ago, which makes sense, right? They've got more affluence, they're making more money, they're more engaged in our category. So what the data is showing us is that we are actually bringing those folks in.
Interesting.
It does not mean we need to rest on our laurels. It just means we need to stay competitive, right? And things like Come Over October are so important right now because they're bringing people together in this conversation. And that's the kind of thing we have to keep doing.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned some of the other categories. So we had a question that was a good segue to this question. What category do you think poses the biggest threat to wine? Is it craft beer, spirits, RTDs, cannabis, other?
Yeah, it's a good question and it's really complex. So I'll answer it in a few points, and then if you want me to go further in some, I can. So in wine, there's always been threats. It's been cheap Australian imports flooding the market. It's been climate change and fires. We've had increased competition from other categories. And then now moderation and wellness, I think, is a threat. But I think for us, we just need to think about that. That's the constant state of the business. We've always been looking at things that are going to come in and take our share away. And so just kind of step back, that's always it. And then I think the biggest task for us as wine is to make sure that we meet people in their occasion and in their moment as they evolve and come into wine.
I'd just like to add that, wine is not monolithic.
Thank you.
Imported wine and domestic wine and, wine at higher price points, lower price points. So I think as much as any category, it's hard to talk about it in such broad strokes. I do think that the wine advocacy, though, is important to cut across those segments of the market and just ensure a healthy wine business. That's what Come Over October is all about.
Yeah, thank you, Gino, for that. I completely agree. And I think that's how we try to look at the wine industry every day is pulling it apart, right? And looking at the places where we have wins, looking at our demographic that we want to speak to. How do we want to speak to them? How do they want to be spoken to? So when we talk about what is coming in and what are the biggest threats, this is a really great chart for everybody to get familiar with, which is just showing, if you look at by generation, so Gen Z's on the left over to boomers, that top portion, it shows you the percentage of folks that are purchasing different kinds of beverages. what has happened in past generations is that there wasn't as much competition. So it was really spirits, beer, and wine that were always at the top of the list. Now, when you look at millennials and Gen Z, they have a lot more options in what they're purchasing when they make their beverage alcohol choice. And you're seeing that right at the top. So things you didn't see there before were flavored malt beverages, ready to drink cocktails, hard seltzers. Those are the things that we're competing against on a daily basis. So when a young person goes to the store, they have so many choices, and this is what they're seeing. What we can see also by generation is that they have different wines that they prefer. And so as wine marketers, we need to look at the generation that we're targeting with the activity, with the promotion, with the channel that we're in, and then what are they drinking, and acknowledging that folks are drinking at different levels. Also, I think we try to sometimes step back even from the generational conversation and just talk about engaged wine consumers, people that love our category, they're in it, it's part of their culture, it's part of their family, and those are the people we need to talk more to.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Shada. That was super interesting, and I agree with you. It's an important slide, and we appreciate you sharing that. One thing I feel like I wanted to comment on, and this was something I was thinking about when I was watching your presentation in particular in the original broadcast. And one of the things I think I love about our industry is that we say it all the time. It's kind of cliche, but this idea that all ships rise with the tide. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing all of this information that Jackson Family Wine spends a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of brain power putting together. And here you are just sharing it with the entire industry. So thank you for that.
George, can I just add something here?
Pile on, Gino. What would you want to say?
So going back to the origins of the wine advocacy campaign that has now come over October, but trust me, there were many iterations before we hit on something that we felt could really resonate with consumers. We acknowledge that, there's always competition, right? This is America, and we're a society that encourages competition. We thrive on competition. So RTDs, marijuana, cocktails, we get it. But the neo-prohibitionist movement, as we understood it, the negative narrative about alcohol generally and wine specifically in the press felt more existential, at least to me. It felt like an unfair fight. And, we're happy to compete. I'm always happy to compete. I'm happy to compete to win business, win clients. I'm happy to advocate for wine against cocktail, even though I do represent spirits, but as a caveat. But this felt like an unfair fight because the narrative was being owned in a way that didn't allow for discourse. And I know I'm touching on a broader subject here, but I think whenever we look at wine relative to RTD, relative to spirits, relative to beer, the overarching issue here is the anti-alcohol forces in general. And there's been a lot of debate about whether wine should partner with the spirits industry, the beer industry, for example. And I think that's a valid discussion. It's just that in terms of at least come over October, Kimberly Charles, Karen MacNeil, and myself are fundamentally wine people. And that's what we love, and that's what we advocate for.
Well, that puts me to another question that was a little further down the list, but you brought it up. Should the categories be working together, pushing back against the anti-alcohol movement, or should just wine just focus on wine and not feel like they need to partner up with the other categories?
Well, I think there is a lot of partnering. The WSWA is now a supporter of the campaign.
Great.
And that's the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America, right? So there's a lot of complementary forces here. The beer is starting to get more active, as based on what I read in the trades. We don't, my agency doesn't do much business in beer. Not that familiar with the category, but if we were contacted by a similar mission-driven company that wanted to collaborate, then we'd be more than happy to do so. And I imagine that may happen in the evolution of our campaign.
Yeah, and one thing too to build on that, our big ask of the wine industry specifically, because we have such a huge economic impact on our states where we produce.
Yeah.
In the trade market, California, there's, hundreds of thousands of jobs that attach back to the wine industry. And so reach out to your congresspeople. So we're finding as we do outreach in the political space that a lot of people aren't aware of what's going on with the FDA and this activity. And so as individual suppliers, please write letters, pick up the phone, send emails. It does matter. And we have gotten some extensions on some of these, the FDA guidelines. And so I think this is where political action needs to come from all of us, right? Versus waiting, I think, to some outside force to fix it all.
Yeah, interesting. All right, I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit, and we're going to come back to some of what we're talking about. But we get a few questions asking about low-alc, no-alc wines. And first question, and Gino, I'll let you kind of maybe could start this conversation. But with regard to the growing popularity around low or no-alc wines, is this a threat? We're still growing, we're still crushing grapes, we're still running them through the winery. But is this a concern that the industry should have, or should we just embrace it because consumers like it?
I think there are wines that generationally have been made low alc, if you think of wines like Chocolate, for example. And those are beautiful wines. And if you're in San Sebastian in Spain and you're having a tapas and you're drinking a Chocolate, what could be better? That's a low alcohol wine. Even Prosecco, which is probably the best success story in wine for the last 25 years, is relatively low alc. So if wines are consciously made low alc, as long as they're made well, same with no-alc, right? I personally have some questions about no-alc only because of the energy it takes to produce no-alc. It does take a lot of energy, and frankly, there are things put into that wine to make it no-alc. So I think it bears more examination. Shiloh would know way more than me. But I think if the wine industry makes good products that people enjoy and come back to, that's the fundamental baseline.
Charlotte, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we are chatting about this all the time. And for us as landowners and as grape growers, number one, most important, I want to keep a bottle of wine on the table, no matter what format it is, as long as it's quality. And we share the same concerns as Gino, as this idea of ensuring that we're putting something forth that represents wine and what it is, right? And if we start hiding things in the wine in order to make them taste good with the absence of alcohol, I think we've missed a little bit, right? And that will come back to us, particularly with the wellness movement. So right now we're experimenting with all kinds of technologies, and there's some exciting ones moving to California. So we're pretty positive that we will be able to get to a no-alc product that we're confident with. But in that, there's a lot of middle. So like what Gino said, there are wines traditionally known for lower alcohol, and there are ways where we can combo some of these technologies with full alcohol wine to make something that is less alcohol to meet a demand of a different consumer. Yeah. And I think we need to make sure that we're showing generations that we're evolving to their needs. An example we brought up the other day was Coke and Diet Coke.
Yeah.
When the consumer said they didn't want all that sugar in their Coca-Cola, did they see it as a threat? For sure they did. And the solution was Diet Coke. And now they have keeping people in soda. That is not where we want to be. We're not in soda, but I think it was an evolution of what we need to do. And I think I am so protective of our agricultural industry, right? Of our farmers, of our laborers, of the hundreds of thousands of people that we employ, that I just want to keep people in the wine space, and I don't want to turn them off. And as consumers are so much more savvy with transparency, with ingredients, with sugar, we need to make sure we're being honest and straightforward and not hiding things in our wine that it's gonna come out on social media and then people are gonna turn against us, right? So I think that transparency part of that conversation is super important. But I'm pretty hopeful about where the technologies are gonna go, and I do share Gina's concerns as well on energy. And the energy that it takes, right? We're all concerned with our carbon output, but I am hopeful.
Yeah, Hey, Dave, anything to layer on to this from a National Association of Wine Retailers perspective?
Well, the discussion about wine versus spirits is one that we've had quite a bit. And to the broader points that were made here, we think cooperation is great, but we think focusing on our product uniquely in our messaging is what's right for us. The laws are different, the process is different, the health aspects of it are significantly different, and the way people consume is very different. Beer and spirits tend to be over consumed in binge fashion, whereas wine tends to be consumed with meals and gradually, which has been shown very significantly to be healthier. Starting with fruit as a product has components, health components, that starting with grain as a product and the concentration of alcohol through distillation loses. So we think we're going to remain unique with wine. With regard to alcohol-free wine, I think that these are the right points. It's not as healthy. So if you look at the younger consumers, especially, two of their biggest concerns are sustainability and health and naturalness. And the alcohol-free products don't have those aspects. So it's a little contrary for them to be embracing those. And they don't have a lot of the health benefits either.
Right.
The alcohol itself is in moderation, reduces heart disease and Alzheimer's and diabetes and kidney disease and a lot of other big killers. And then the wine, the grape extraction, the solids add an even greater health component there from what studies have consistently shown.
Well, that's a perfect segue to another question that was submitted. Moderate consumption is part of the Mediterranean diet, which remains very popular, which is linked to longer lifespan, less heart disease and cancer. Why are we not talking about like the Mediterranean diet as an example more, or other things like that?
I would love,
take this
I would
one.
love if somebody would take it on to work with the folks at Blue Zones. They have a book. They have cities around the country that are they're working toward being blue zones. They had a Netflix series. They talk about the Mediterranean diet. We as a wine supplier cannot talk about wine and health, but there's a lot of folks that can. And I think you've got this organization that has a lot of momentum around it. It's kind of a Blue Zones is a global movement right now. I think wine should be working.
Tell everybody about what Blue Zone is in case they don't know.
Oh yeah. So the Blue Zones, a gentleman worked on a book, and I'm blanking on his name right now. Maybe Nick, you could put the book up when we get there and you can help this part out. Looking at places around the world with the most healthy aging populations, the highest rates of centenarians, which are people over 100. He did a lot of meta-analysis on where are people the healthiest. Then he went the next level, which is the why. Why are people in these regions so healthy? In Greece, in Japan. He highlights a bunch of regions around the world, and he distills it down to certain parts of the diet, certain tea consumption and wine consumption in certain areas, and parts of Italy and Greece where they looked at the wine connection. He's pulling apart what is keeping people living the longest, and it's a combination of a lifestyle. And so that lifestyle, he distilled that down as the Blue Zones, where people are living the healthiest, the longest. He wrote a book about it. There's a Netflix series about it. And now there are cities around the world that are becoming blue zones. So there are healthy cities. City governments are working together to make their communities healthier. And wine is part of this blue zone concept. So there's my challenge. Somebody call me later.
We have reached out to Blue Zones to come over October campaign, and we're hoping to engage them in our campaign. Mediterranean diet, wine companies are so constrained, as Shiloh just mentioned, about what they can say. And I said before about sort of fighting with your hands tied behind your back, and I think that's part of it. For years, we've heard that the Mediterranean diet is one of the healthiest diets in the world, let alone a fulfilling, delicious diet to follow. And now now that a lot of that science is being challenged. And I get that, that's fair game. Science is science. You go where the facts lead you. But when one side is constrained from even investing in the research or talking about new, research results that may favor its side, it's basically an unfair fight. But there's no Mediterranean diet without wine, as much as some revisionists would like to claim these days.
Yeah, and to add to that, the blue zone area, another key component was the sociability. And I think that's what Come Over October is all about.
That's a great point. Yep.
The health benefit and disbenefits to being isolated and not being part of a social group show in average life expectancy pretty dramatically.
And we are very cognizant of the health benefits of sociability, of a loneliness deficit in our country, friendship deficit. And those are proven facts too. And if you look at the American Medical Association, you'll find, the Surgeon General talking about very measurable health risk of social isolation. And again, we do not talk about health with Come Over October only because we want to focus on messaging that's positive and affirmative, and messaging that the wine industry can embrace without fear of, we're litigation. We live in a very litigious society. But absolutely, Dave, that's a critical point of sociability. That's what our campaign's all about.
That's kind of a good segue to another question that was submitted. It said, why is psychological well-being typically excluded from the discussion of wine and health, or is that not important?
It should be, in my opinion, and I believe the Come Over October campaign will allude to that. It's one of its primary focuses. The data certainly dramatically supports that. Surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, moderate consumption of alcohol reduces, or is, the data says is associated with a reduction in suicide, which is a substantial killer. So it comes across quite clearly, and it's a message that we should talk further about. And it is one of the key components of the blue zones explicitly.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, the United States has a culture that drives, heavily from England and more Northern European countries, whereas Mediterranean countries, wine is considered food more than it's considered alcohol. And wine as food is a key message. Also, one of the messages of our campaign, and likely the key message of our follow-up campaign in the spring of 2025. So to me, it's all about changing a narrative about wine. As Dave said before, you think of beer and spirits, those are the binge-driven categories of alcohol. Wine is food. Wine is on a table. And similar to the way the Italians or the Spanish consume wine, they consume wine with food. You rarely will see an Italian drink wine if they're not eating something. It's a great saying by the Italians. You haven't drunk too much, you just haven't eaten enough.
Shiloh, I think you mentioned this phrase talking about the language of wine and how do we evolve the language of wine. I think that came from you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think Gino has a lot to say too, because he is thinking about the language all day, every day.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing for me, and that we've heard and learned and responded to over the last couple of years, is that our language can often feel exclusive. We're speaking in terms that are not relatable to everybody, and maybe put us in a position that can be perceived as, a little too highbrow, maybe a little snobby at times, or even using descriptors that aren't relative to or relevant to the rest of American culture. So, my big ask is for us, my big challenge with my teams is making our language inclusive. and talking about wine in the terms appropriate to the audience that you're talking to. When I say inclusive too, I mean even like the food that you talk about pairing your wine with. Like if we're always talking about fine dining cuisine with wine, just by only talking about that, we're taking wine out of people's consideration set from when they're just barbecuing in the backyard.
Right.
Right? Or talking about Mexican food. We know that Mexican food is the most consumed food now in the United States. We need to talk about that cuisine more. We need to talk about that, how that goes with our wines, the flavors that go together. And then I think on language too, talked about food pairings, but then I think we need to go a little bit away from rules, and that wine is about joy, it's about pleasure, it's about sharing, and that it doesn't have to follow certain rules or be in a certain cup or glass shape in order to be enjoyed. But I'd love to hear from Gino, just kind of you guys as you modify messaging in your PR world, how do you look at that?
You know, it's really funny because we put some messages on our website as a guidance for how to talk about wine. And before we went through that exercise, we just assumed that all wine people either talk about wine the same way or think about wine the same way. And in many cases they do, because a lot of independent campaigns we found arrived at the same point we did about the sociability of wine and wine's ability to bring people together. But I think just articulating it for wine company, people in the wine business, wine company executives, everybody in the world of wine, to just articulate that messaging. So in our busy days, we can say, yeah, that's what I love about wine. That's why I'm in this business. That's what I should be communicating to my consumer about wine. If I'm selling Ornellaia, I'm going to want to talk about, soil type and Mediterranean breezes off the sea, sure. And I'll devolve into this more esoteric conversation. But whether you're drinking Ornellaia or drinking a fantastic wine that you could buy for $12, fundamentally you're loving wine for a very similar reason. And the language counts. The narrative is everything. And that's what our campaign, that's what it started to change. That's why we started it, to change the narrative about wine from this negative alcohol-related narrative to a positive social, cultural conversation. And Shyla mentioned economics before. There are rural communities all over the world that depend on wine for their sustenance. We work with Wines of Georgia. Some crazy number, like 22% of the workers in that country, their jobs somehow relate to wine. I mean,
wow,
that's meaningful for me.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I just to build on that too, when we are I think we need to more fiercely talk about that wine as a natural product in our language. I think that there are generations that know that wine is grapes taken off a vine, crushed, maybe put in a barrel, or fermented, crushed, put in a barrel, and then aged and then delivered to you. I think there is a huge swath of our populations that do not know that. And I think we need to sometimes take our language back a little bit, talk about that we are 100% grapes, talk about how we're made, talk about the connection to the vineyard. I think we take some of that for granted sometimes. And I think as we're trying to bring people in, we need to bring the natural parts of wine in. And, natural wine, the movement has been wonderful, but it's made an assumption that other wines are not natural.
Right.
And so we need to make sure we're having that, open dialogue.
Well, I love the way you frame it up because, we've all experienced what it's like to go on a winery tour or watch other people go through their first winery tour and actually, during harvest in particular, right? And they're watching this, which has gone on for thousands of years, and the harvesting of the grapes and the bringing it into the production area and the crushing and everything that is part of the process, up to taking some wine out of a barrel and putting it right in your glass, right? It's like I've always said, like, I don't think anyone has ever had like a bad barrel sample while they're in the cellar, right? It's like the greatest thing that you've ever experienced. And I wish we could do more of that, because I think, to your point, Shyla, in particular, it's removes all of the intimidation away, right? It's just, it feels very natural, right? You're growing something and you're processing, and it's just something I wish more people could experience. Okay, a couple more questions, and I'm going to let you guys go because we've spent quite a bit of time together. But Gino, I'll let you start this one. How can the industry leverage media outlets more to create more positive news about wine?
Diversify the story, talk personally about your own interests. If you're a surfer or a mountain climber, if you donate, a month a year to, helping people in underprivileged areas, be personal about it, because as Shyla mentioned before, wine can come off as a little esoteric and a little off-putting. Just make it friendlier and more approachable. At the same time, you don't have to dumb down what you're doing in terms of the quality of your product. And the very best wines, from Louis Roederer Champagne to Massetto, in my experience, are earthy, but they can explain to you why they're so special at the same time. And that's a masterful trick. But also, wine is a collective business. Some of the most rewarding work that I've done in my agency career is collective, whether that's Cecilia Dock and having people look at Sicily in a new way, in a more positive way. Sicily used to have such a negative reputation about being a backward place and mafia-ridden. And now people are loving Sicily and seeing the great farming communities and the culture and the history. And a lot of that, frankly, is through wine. So I think collectivism in wine is a natural. I think it makes sense. People should band together and work together to communicate about what they love, what they work.
Yeah, I love that one. We were, Gino, the other day meeting with one of our media partners, and we just launched a new Chenin Blanc, and we can't carry the Chenin Blanc, mantle on our own, but we were like, let's get together with some of our other producers. We were going through lists of other producers, and we know Chenin is more drought and heat tolerant. It's going to help the wine industry get through climate change, right? And it mitigates some of the risk that we have. And so we were just saying, let's get together with our other producers and work with our media partners to talk about this variety more. Those kind of efforts, I think, are worthy of doing. And I do think that's how the wine industry was built in the United States, right?
Yeah, and Chenin's a great example because, from France to South Africa, right? I mean, Chenin is a success story, and why not California too, of course.
And it's delicious.
It is delicious.
I love a good Chenin Blanc.
So there's a question about dealing with what we're facing right now, and the question I'll read it and then we'll kind of go through it. This is, how can those of us in the wine industry also help to expose some of the misinformation about alcohol that's being pushed, or should we just focus on pushing the positive attributes?
I know I have an opinion on that.
Dave,
I personally think that although in certain situations you just stay positive, I think the misinformation is so dramatic, and the bias in the industry that Gino mentioned, where we have a government regulation that you can't say anything positive, but you have people like Tim Stockwell that are purposefully cherry picking thousands of different studies for the 2 or 3 that he wants to talk about and biasing that message. We have to counter that. We have to counter that with facts. We have to counter that with messaging in the right situations. But to Shyla's point, we need to make it clear that wine is a natural, and I'll use the word healthful, beverage in moderation, especially as it goes with food and especially as it increases sociability, but in so many other ways too. I think if we lose that messaging, we lose a huge amount.
Dave mentioned Google searches before, and we live in this information age, or disinformation age, however you choose to describe it. But the fact is that news gets news, and the more positive news we could put out, the more, we could push negative news down in the Google search. That's an advice we give to our clients all the time. And when there's some negativity, well, let's put out more positivity. So when somebody types you into Google, the negative story is three pages down. So I'm a big believer in relentless positive messaging. We have so many good things to talk about, and make them personal, make them real, and heartfelt.
Shyla, anything to add?
Sorry, I was really into Gino's comment. No.
I put you on the spot. I'm going to finish up with a question for Gino about come over October. But was there anything else before I get to that last question that Dave or Shyla or Gino feel like we didn't cover that you want to chat about?
One comment that I found interesting as I was reading other people's comments on these topics, and you have a really interesting book in the background there, Shyla. You may want to pull out and wave around. The very good news.
I waved it around
wine.
last time.
Okay, but wine is like one of the very few fundamental products that we have that are on a J curve, where it's much more healthy to consume a modest amount. What are the other products? Water, food, exercise, vitamin A. There's no J curve for donuts, right? There's no consumption of donuts does not improve any aspect of your health. Wine is one of those very primary things where just because overuse of it has a negative effect, you have to look at the fact that underuse of it does too, and make it part of a healthy lifestyle, a healthy message. And I think we need to make more of a point of those types of topics in our discussions.
Yeah. And to zoom back to where we started, with the WHO's goal is to eliminate disease. And they weren't going after the wine industry, right? But the ramifications of what they did it's huge, and maybe wasn't quite understood. But there is an issue with alcoholism, but it is a tiny percentage of the people that consume alcohol. And with one swath to eliminate a certain kind of disease, the WHO is causing these global ripple effects that have economic impact that we can't even quantify right now. But I think too, we have to remember why they made that comment, right? And it wasn't directly about wine, it was about disease. And that's how they look at their world.
Yeah, it was also socioeconomic. They look at the cost to, let's say, if a starving family where one member of the family spends money that needed to be spent on food, on alcohol instead. But that's a non-issue in the U.S. and, to Gino's point, most of Western Europe.
Yeah.
So they're looking at broader range, and they're also looking at the fact that in socialized medicine environments, the cost of treating cancer is much higher than treating heart disease or any of the things that alcohol improves. So they're focusing on the cancer aspect of it for that reason. Not all those are relevant here in the U.S. And to your point, about 1% of people are problem drinkers that do consume alcohol, whereas only about 8% of people have never consumed alcohol. 70+% do, and you have that tiny percent of problematic people, just as you have problematic eaters and problematic over exercisers, but it's a tiny problem.
Yeah. Well, this has been really great. One of the good things that has come out of all this is the Come Together and Come Over October initiative, which we're going to talk to Karen about in just a second. But Gino, do you want to give us a little update as one of the co-founders of Come Together of what's been happening with that movement?
Yeah, I've been accused of being a hopeless optimist, but I will say that we announced publicly in a webinar on July 8th our campaign, and now we have over 100 companies supporting us. That support means financial contribution, which frankly is less important than activating the Come Over October campaign in your own marketing efforts. So to have over 100 companies involved in less than essentially, what is that, 2 months, tells us that the industry is excited by this, that they're rallying under. Jackson Family coming on very early was hugely influential, so thank you, Charlotte, for that. Dave with Benchmark Wine Group and National Association of Wine Retailers was very active from the beginning. I'm very optimistic that the wine industry is banding together in a very positive way to promote wine. There's never been a generic wine campaign, not related to a denomination or country of origin or price segment. This is about wine, and the response has been, really fantastic. So
yeah,
I'm very optimistic.
No, that's great. I mean, what you guys came up with was fantastic. And again, we're gonna bring on Karen here in just a second and dive into Come Over October a little bit more deeply. But I just want to thank you three for joining us once again. I know how busy everyone is, but this was a really great discussion. So Dave, Gino, Shiloh, thank you so much for being with us today. And maybe we'll have to get you back here in like a year or so, and we'll do a little update on where we're at. But thanks again, and thanks for everyone in the audience. And up next, Karen MacNeil.
Thanks so much, George. We really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, George.
Hey, Karen, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, George.
Thank you so much for coming to part two. As we said earlier, that this is the first time we ever had a part two, but we've never had a webinar that had so many people sign up and who submitted so many questions. And as I, mentioned to the gang earlier, even with a second segment like we're doing, we're still not thinking get to all the questions, but I think we're going to get to the most important ones. But before we get into it, I was thinking about you and what you've come up with here, and just looking at all the things you've done, right? So we all know about the Wine Bible, which the fact that it took you 10 years to put that together is just mind-boggling to me, like the level of commitment. And now you're on the 3rd edition, so that's just crazy. Wine writer, creator, editor-in-chief for Wine Speed, right? I know that takes time. You've got Karen MacNeil and Company, so you're doing consulting. You've been involved with the Today Show, Wine, Food, and Friends, but now you find time to start come together and a whole nother initiative. It's like, I feel like I'm busy, but then I was like reading what you do, and I'm like, I'm not that busy. I could be doing more. But I wanted to ask you, because I know there's been I've seen you on other interviews where you talk a lot about some of the other things you've done, but I'm super curious about how did your wine career begin? Like, where did it all start?
Yeah. Well, first, I feel like, when you want to get something done, give it to a busy woman. Sorry, George. I know you, but your staff will know what I mean.
Yeah.
I started as a journalist in New York many years ago. And actually, I shouldn't say I started, because in those days before blogs, you couldn't just be a writer. You had to try and break into publishing. And in my case, I collected 324 rejection slips before my first article was, before I sold my first article for $30 to the Village Voice. And that article was on butter because my bright idea at the time, I was pretty poor. I was on food stamps. And my bright idea was, if I started writing about food, maybe people would give me samples, and it would be a better way to, it would improve my diet in a way. And it was true. People did give you samples, and I did start eating better. But so I became, over the next few years, a pretty successful food writer. I was writing for New York Times Magazine. I published a book on food by Random House. But I realized in all of this that what I really loved was the whole world of gastronomy, which of course includes the four big beverages of history, and the four big beverages of civilization are coffee, tea, beer, and wine. And coffee, tea, and beer, you can kind of teach yourself by a lot of reading and research. But wine was hard, right? Because first of all, what was written back then about wine was often really dry and impenetrable. I can remember thinking to myself, Meursault, Macon, Montagny, like, what are these places inside places? Yeah. Are these grape varieties? You know, it's hard to teach yourself about wine, and you had to taste it. And I can promise you that you can't buy wine when you're on food stamps. It's actually illegal. So anyway, I eventually managed to talk a friend of mine who was also a journalist into asking a group of other journalists. These were all men in New York. At that time, they kind of controlled everything that was being written about wine in the whole country. And my friend convinced the others to let me come to the tastings that they were doing every week. And, you know, people, the Bordeaux would be flying in, Chianti Classico, the port producers on Thursday. I mean, it was unbelievable, right? And they let me join them on one condition, which was that I not talk. And I didn't talk. For like about 5 or 6 years. I tasted at least once a week with these guys. And, you know, by the way, I didn't want to offer my opinion. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have a right to an opinion yet. I didn't know enough to have an opinion, but I wanted to ask questions, right? I had 1,000 questions because wine is a little complicated to teach yourself. So the final word about this is that there's a happy ending, because I remembered so painfully, in a way, what it felt like to be so confused by wine that all of the questions I had became the basis for the Wine Bible, which became one of the, if not the best-selling wine book in the United States. Yeah. So happy ending.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think, so I did not grow up drinking wine in a household where wine was the thing. And I wound up in Northern California and just loved it here. And that's how I wound up, you know, getting into wine. And I felt, as you were speaking, I could get a sense for how you must have felt, because it is overwhelming. It was overwhelming. And I didn't even know sometimes, I think in the beginning, what the right questions to ask were. But I also felt like as my career progressed, you know, first half of my career just purely on the winery side, and now doing what I do, which is kind of on the B2B side of our industry, it actually turned out to be a good thing, because I had more in common with the regular Joe, you know, or Jill, or however you want to phrase it out there, because most people also grew up in a household that wasn't wine on the table every day. And I think it actually helped me, even though in the very beginning, I was just, it was scary.
It's actually a little bit good that when you're a beginner, you don't realize how complicated the topic is, because you really would stop. You would be like, oh, no, can't do this.
Yeah, it's so fun. I remember like subscribing to Wine Spectator, you know, very early in my career, and trying to like read every article and go through all of the scoring at the, you know, in the back of the book. And I just couldn't, you know. I remember telling myself, okay, you know what, stop, just focus on California for now, and we'll start there, because you just can't do it. So so I take it that you must have looked forward to those tastings every week. You must have, the wine bug bit you. And
and nobody, of course, you know, we've all heard that phrase to be bitten by the wine bug. Nobody ever says, I'm unbitten, you know, I'm done, I don't care anymore. It's one of the more amazing aspects of wine, that you just fall deeper and deeper and deeper in love with it.
Yeah.
And once you're on that gerbil wheel, you don't ever get off. You just love it.
Yeah.
And certainly that's what happened with me. And I will say in defense of the men that I tasted with, I am thankful to them because I also watched how serious they were about wine.
Yeah.
And they were very serious. And I learned to pay attention by watching how deeply they paid attention. So it was a good thing, really. I modeled my behavior in a sense after theirs. And I was serious and studious. I didn't take going to a tasting lightly.
Yeah.
In those days in New York, you really paid attention. There was no like socializing.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like when as you're describing it, like you're going through like an apprenticeship, right? So like you can come, but you can't speak for 5 years, and then you can ask a question here or something. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I guess we all have our own journey, but I'm totally on board with what you said. It's like once you get to that certain point, you realize you never stop learning, you never stop exploring, and it's fun. It can be fun too.
Totally fun.
All right, we're gonna get into what we have you back here for. So, as I said earlier, like I don't know, you're just one of those people. Obviously, like you see something needs to be done, you just do it. So, talk a little bit about how Come Together came together.
Yeah. Well, Come Together, Community for Wine, is a company that Gino Colangelo, Kimberly Charles, and I formed in this past March, 2024. It's sort of a mission-driven company. We take no salaries. Our goal is to, through events and media, to tell the positive story about wine historically and culturally. And so our first campaign happens in a few weeks here called, actually less than a few weeks, called Come Over October. And this will be an annual event. It's already hugely, we could never have imagined how successful this initiative has been. I think in part because it's so true that every wine drinker, I think, in the world has had the experience of meeting someone who's a stranger, having some wine with them, and that person is now your friend.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a simple but powerful fact. And so Come Over October is also very simple but powerful. It's the idea that during the month, we're asking wine drinkers everywhere to invite a friend, a colleague, a family member, a neighbor, to just come over to share some wine. Because we know that in the process of doing that, we are our best selves, right? We deepen friendships that way. We extend friendships that way. And that idea of coming together personally, in person, sharing some wine, resonates whether you're 23 or 63.
Yeah. Now you came up with Come Over October, right? So what were you doing? How did it come to you? I'm super curious about that.
Well, in this past spring, I was increasingly despondent about, as a journalist myself, I of course read all the news, and I was just so unhappy that first of all, that the conversation, the narrative around wine had devolved to just being a conversation about alcohol. And, if all it is alcohol, man, there are cheaper and faster ways than having a glass of Pinot Noir or Cabernet with dinner, right? So I know as a researcher that wine is threaded into this very rich tapestry of history, culture, art, religion. It's more than just alcohol. So that was making me kind of unhappy.
Yeah.
And also I kept thinking, why isn't the wine industry telling its own positive story more forcefully or even at all? So one morning I was walking the dog and I was grumbling to myself, how come nobody's telling the positive story about wine? And then I just said to myself, you're a word person, you should tell the story. And so having turned the binoculars around on myself, I thought, all right, well, I'll write an article. And then I realized one article isn't enough. We really need some action here, because it seemed to me that the whole wine industry was in a state of inaction. No one knew what to do. And I thought, what if just every wine drinker in the whole country invited someone to come over in October? And I liked the rhyme of that, come over October. A writer would like that, you know. What if they did that? What if everybody did that? That would be true to what we know about wine, which is that it's been a positive cultural force in society and in history.
Yeah, I loved it the first time I heard it, because it was an idea that no matter where you played in the industry, you could get behind it. You could be a part of it, right? Whether you're, a winery who's going to do something special in October, a retailer. I got a call, I mentioned this earlier with the other panelists. The day that we did the broadcast, I got a call from Steve Fredericks, president of Turrentine Wine Brokerage, said, "This is great. How can we support this? I mean, this is fantastic." And I started to think, like, has there been anything else like that, where no matter where you were, this was something you could get behind, this is something you could participate in, this is something you could support in your own way, associations. And I couldn't think of anything. So I just think it's brilliant. And Gino talked a little bit about how much support that you've gotten already. Have you gotten some things that you're like, I can't believe it, these guys are even on board?
Yes. I mean, I have to say that when the rideshare company Lyft told us that they would be our official rideshare company and be a patron, I mean, I thought, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah.
I felt that way about Southern Glazer's wine and spirit wine company, distributing company.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm falling over my words there.
That's okay.
But Southern, as we all know it to be, they are a very big fish. And they call the most amazing thing, George, is that I guess I called Lyft, but all of the other supporters, people have been calling us.
Yeah.
Constellation, Jackson Family Wines, Trinchero, I mean, National Association of Wine Retailers, wine.com, Total Wine and more. I've never in my life had, the phone ring so often with people saying, we want to do this. Tell us how, tell us when, tell us what you need. And so people have been also saying, let me give you $5,000, let me give you $10,000. And we're taking that money, as I mentioned, we are all pro bono, Kimberly, Gino, and I, but we're just plowing those dollars back into even bigger and bigger events for Come Over October. And we are planning already a spring campaign as well. And just later today, in fact, we'll be talking to the Congressional Wine Caucus, who Congress invited us to come and talk about Come Over October. And the international support has been astounding.
Yeah.
The Champagne Bureau, Wines of South Africa, Wines of Australia, Wines of New Zealand, Wines of Chile, the Chianti Classico Consortium, the Prosecco Consortium, all of these entities have called us to say, we want to do this in our country.
What's, I think, so cool about it, this is, aside from the whole wine, the wine industry stuff, is, you're journalist, but you're an entrepreneur as well, right? And as an entrepreneur, I've had a few good ideas and I'm always going, oh, is that my last best idea? And I like, you must be like, oh my God, this might be one of my best ideas I've had yet.
I'm feeling pretty good about it. Yeah, I like, before the Wine Bible, there was no book written like the Wine Bible. And actually, before I created the wine curriculum for the CIA out here in Napa Valley, there was nothing like that. There was no Come Over October. And I guess I think of myself as a pretty strong creative content person. And I like the feeling of this there's a germ of an idea here and nobody's done it. Let me really create it. So I love that. I love going from zero to
Well,
to
something that,
see.
like just was in here and now it's everywhere, right? So congratulations on that. I just think that is so cool. All right, couple of other questions for you because I know you're busy. Is there anything else like this? Are there other initiatives like this outside the United States that you're aware of that is grabbing gear, or even I mean, I know there's some other ones inside the United States, nothing quite like this, but I was curious if you've come across anything internationally along the same lines.
You know, I have not. There's certainly a lot of the opposite is true. There's a lot of there are international organizations in Europe, in London, in Sweden that are very anti-wine and anti-alcohol in general. But and in the United States, you know, the efforts to tell a positive story about wine, there are several. Napa Valley Vintners has their Why Wine campaign. Wine Market Council has their Wine Is ... campaign. Of course, the Wine Institute is at work on a big campaign that we think will be released either at the end of this year or early next year. I don't have the details on that, but I know I was just talking to Bobby, who is the chief executive yesterday, and he told me that they're gas pedal to the floor creating a campaign. And we need all of them, right? All of them, because the wine industry that we love needs help right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think kind of back to your idea, which is, it sounds like it's grabbing an international gear anyway, right? You're here from these other regions. It's something, like I said earlier, something that anyone can get involved in, and there's nothing intimidating about it, right? It's just about an excuse to get together, to enjoy a glass of wine. And I'm super curious about, I mean, we haven't even gotten to year one. I started thinking about what's this going to be like in year 3 or 4 or 5. I mean, it's going to be massive.
You know, we did a calculation a couple of days ago of the reach of Come Over October. As of the second week in September, we estimate that 508 million people now know about this campaign.
Amazing.
That's through press, advertising, which has been given to us about $60,000 in free, contributed ad space.
Yeah.
So press, articles, social media, that's where in 6 weeks to have that kind of traction is, you're on the right side of an issue when that happens.
It's unprecedented. I mean, we get, with our wine industry advisor, we get, press releases, and we get a press release every couple of days about another winery that's doing something with Come Over October, which is a good segue to the last question I wanted to ask you is, how can wineries and or winery associations be involved with Come Over October?
Yeah. One of the reasons that I think the idea has spread so magnificently so quickly is that every winery and every wine association is doing things, doing whatever makes sense for them a little bit differently, but they're all using our Come Over October logo, which is trademarked and which is free and available for use on the Come Over October website. And also there are posters that you can download and use, table tents, all kinds of things. So wineries are holding special Come Over October events. They are putting together packages for their wine club members that are special Come Over October wine packs with a little note card in that says, hey, invite some friends over. It's Come Over October month. associations are doing things like creating wine routes. So during the month of October, we have, let's say, 40 wineries in our AVA. Come and tour them all. They're all doing open houses for Come Over October. And some places have been quite charming about their ideas, like Texas. The entire state of Texas is doing a Come Over October, y'all campaign. So, the sky is the limit. We also know that many wineries are encouraging their employees. They're going to be doing Come Over October events for their employees. And of course, you can come over to someone's home, you can come over to a winery, you can come over to a restaurant or a hotel. There's just an endless number of ways to pay, in a sense, homage to wine's historic positive role. And you don't have to throw a party. It can be just having dinner with a friend, but maybe a dinner every single night.
Yeah, 31 days.
It is a month long, though. Yeah.
Is it comeoveroctober.com?
It is. It's www.comeoveroctober.com. And it's super helpful in spreading the word for people to use the hashtag @ComeOverOctober. I guess that's not a hashtag, but to use the social media @ComeOverOctober.
Perfect. Well, Karen, thank you so much. Congratulations again on coming up with the best idea that I've heard for our industry, I think, ever. I mean, it's just fantastic. I wish you all the success. This is so good for our industry. And like I said earlier, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens this October and October's going forward, right? Because this is a great thing. Comeoveroctober.com. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for watching today, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, George.